January 2021 Governor's meeting order. I will need a resolution to accept the minutes from December 22nd, 2020 meeting. Motion by Brian. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. Paul.
Paul? Good. You're not on the committee.
Oh, I keep forgetting I got thrown off.
Okay, I need a motion for the governance for to accept the minutes, sorry. John Rozelle, second by Paul Ferguson. Any omissions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. First order of business is department request reports for building and grounds capital plan discussion. We've passed this out. Do we want to turn it over to Matt to discuss this?
I think I'd probably forward this right to Brian. Start the discussion because everybody's got a turnout of the whole plan. I can give you a quick update of the Burgoyne. Our bids are out. We did a walkthrough, seemed to have a bunch of interest in the job on the roofs. So probably a couple of weeks, we'll have the bids back for that and know our exact cost of the roof. But then we'll lead right into the 5-year capital plan. Everything else we're doing in buildings and grounds is basically responded to COVID cleaning and everything else right now. So I don't have a ton to report to you other than the capital plan.
Okay.
Hit the other two things, if you would, Matt, on Burgoyne, the campus parking lot paving and the campus upgrades and why all that's important in the timeline and public health and all that, if you would.
Gotcha. All right. So if we go to buildings and grounds projects, the roof replacement, which we've been talking about, we don't know the exact cost yet. The parking lot paving is going to be a necessity, I guess, to handle the parking for when we move public health over there. There'll be enough. It'll be a public out front. It's going to be an in-house project that I'll be working with Deb and DPW to do, ensure up a cost. That's a budgetary number that was provided to me by DPW, the 50,000. If we
that's just materials.
That's materials, not labor. Yep, that's if you all are familiar with it, the circle that's out front would be taken, from the sidewalk back to about the flagpole and making 2 rows of parking or 3 rows, whatever fits in there between the 2 circles. And that would be a place for public, and the handicap access would be in the front and stuff like that. So that would help all departments, but right now we're getting by without it. The other project is not truly a project, it's Burgoyne campus upgrades, 100,000. This list of upgrades could come from the architectural survey that's going to be done or in the process. We haven't started it yet because we're waiting on finance, but to approve it. This would be upgrades needed to get the nurses over there, the HVAC system to provide fresh air, the projects that we think are going to need to be done to upgrade that to put, multiple departments in there. They're not identified yet. That's why they're in there as upgrades. So that's a Burgoyne campus. And that's something that if 2021, it's 100,000, but maybe this year it's none of it. Maybe next year it would move into 2022. It's kind of like a unknown. The other project I'd like to do is the rooftops, the second in the set of rooftops down at the law center. They are already engineered. We paid the engineering. We have them. I took them. They were actually out to bid at one point. I took them off from bid when COVID started due to all the restrictions of having meetings and in-person meetings and everything else. So we're sitting on basically, 15,000, I think it was, of engineering ready to go out to bid. I'd like to put that back out to bid as part of the capital plan. I guess that's the first year stuff. I'll take questions. And it looks like I'm
So-
froze up.
We can hear you, Matt.
You can?
Got a
I can't, everybody's frozen on my screen.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you though.
Can you hear us, Matt?
Yeah, okay, that works. I can hear you.
Okay, good. So just out of curiosity, in 2025, you had a LEC roof replacement for $1 million. What's the difference in those two prices? One was 500,000, one was $1 million.
One's a roof and one's a rooftop unit, cooling and heating, air conditioning.
All roof replacement, got it.
It's kind of a placeholder. We don't know if 2025 is the actual year or not.
Okay,
And you don't have anything in 2022 because we don't know what's supposed to happen this year that might end up in 2022. But all that's where our funding goes to.
okay.
Dave?
Yes, Matt.
So Matt, you replaced one LEC RTU already. The second one was supposed to go up to bid last year. We're going to try to go up this year. And then the third one in 2023 or 2024. Are there just 3 on the roof?
Actually, each job contains 2 units, so there's 6 on the roof, but first round was 2, this round would be 2, second round would be 2.
Okay, so by the end of this, we'll be all updated with all the units and we'll be in really good shape. Right?
Yes, that would be the case.
Okay, great.
Dana Ham?
Matt, can you explain why, if these rooftop units are being replaced, why do they have to be engineered? Don't you just replace them with the capacity of what was there before?
No, all 6 are custom units, Dana. They're all custom units. They all have to be engineered for that particular purpose. Each one serves a different purpose up there. They're not like cookie cutter ones that you can buy. So they have to be engineered.
Okay, but if you're going to have somebody manufacture these, custom manufacturing, why does there have to be engineering in front of that? Wouldn't the custom builder build them to the size of the existing one? Because I'm sure it's just BTU rated, the capacity. I don't understand why you would, if it's a replacement, wouldn't you replace it with the same kind rather than having an engineering firm be involved before it goes to the builder?
When it goes out to bid, not only is the work of installing it going out to bid, they can use their own companies to build it too. So you're getting from Carrier, you're getting from, different brands of manufacturing too. And it isn't as simple as just a swap out. The best way to, describe it is that it isn't like your house where you're just swapping out BTUs. The BTUs is one little part of it. Everything from craning it onto the roof to the weights to the supports on the roof, the patching of the roof, everything's engineered. So when the job comes, it's cut and dry when you're dealing with 500,000.
So the engineer kind of creates the specs and then the custom builder builds it to those specs. And the specs also include, like you said, the crane and the roof support?
Yes, they do. Everything right down to taking stickers off the unit. So when you put it out to bid, you get fair bids. There's no change orders. There's no dealing with a contractor saying, well, I thought this would work and this would work and all that. It's right down to the T. And that's how you get a
in
fair
2020,
bid.
in 2024, when you want to do this again, is there going to be another $15,000 engineering fee for that?
It'll probably be, and 15 was a round number. I don't remember exactly what it was, between 10 and 15. Sure. That's expected.
We can't use the engineering for 2021. It's going to be a different build.
Sure. All 6 are different units. They do different things, in the way I paired them up. One of them, like say one rooftop unit 1 does the makeup air, which pumps the fresh air in the building and it's responsible for that. Unit 2 is more responsible for the heating and the cooling end of it. So there's a little bit of, there's difference, and there's a lot of difference between them. It's definitely not cookie cutter.
All right, thank you.
Matt, so we've done 2 of the 6, and this is 3 and 4, and then eventually 5 and 6. I know prices change over the years,
Yes.
but in the first 1 and 2 that we've done, Do you recall what that cost was? Anywhere near 500 or less or more? Any idea?
Well, it was 499 and 499,000 and close to 500. That's where that budget number comes in. I
Okay,
can't
so
tell
that
you-
budget number is based upon the original from the first go-around.
Yep, which was last year.
Okay,
So-
thanks.
I'm hoping it's in that ballpark. I can tell you 5 and 6, I would expect to be less money. They are smaller units. They serve the kitchen area and up front in that area, the jail. Those two are smaller units than the other one. So I'm hoping maybe on that one, we would have some sort of savings, but a lot of it to do right now is manufacturing and whether you can get them manufactured, lead times and the price of steel. There's a huge amount of steel that goes into these builds. So
Okay, thanks.
commodity prices.
Any other questions for Matt? Dana?
Matt, just a couple years ago, we had a lot of discussion about paving the main complex parking lot. That discussion has gone away. It's not even in the 5-year project, the main complex. What are the plans for that?
Currently, there is no plans for the parking lot. We've been patching as needed. And obviously, I mean, you were around when the parking lot discussion came around. It kind of just died at that. Does it still need to be done? Sure. When's it happening and why and where hasn't been discussed by me or hasn't been asked of me yet. So
If I recall, I don't think that discussion a couple years ago involved in-house paving. Maybe it did. I think that's what's different about the Burgoyne. But does anybody recall if that discussion a couple years ago involved in-house paving?
I can fill you in on that a little bit. That was one of the reasons why the project died was we were told that DPW could do it. You know, since then, I don't know if that was a true statement at the time.
Al?
You can take Mr. Rizal first, Dave.
John?
It was definitely discussed about in-house paving that, and a solution never come out of it. And that's right, maybe that's, they said you couldn't do it, but I don't know. I can't remember the reasons why.
As I remember, is because when we paved in-house, we paved so wide, dead straight. And this parking lot was gonna be a lot of twists and turns in small areas, and as I recall, we were told that what we have for setup wouldn't work here. I don't know if that's true or not, I just recall that from 4 years ago.
Well, they're gonna pave Burgoyne. Burgoyne, is there much difference?
A lot.
I believe so, but I don't know.
Matt, can you answer that question?
Yeah, sure. Our parking lot here, there was a lot of different variables. There was full depth reclamations that were needed in spots. There was a lot of infrastructure underneath our parking lots here, spots where there wasn't drainage. It was a lot more than just the paving end of it. Over at Burgoyne, I think when I discussed it with Jimmy, we agreed that a couple dry wells over there in the parking lot for drainage were going to work, you know, and that was something that we could do in-house there. The full complex paving job and parking lot was much bigger. I don't even know if we'd been capable of doing all of it, the infrastructure, and how long it would take. And a lot of it has to do with their schedule. I mean, a whole parking lot like this, including the, you know, the narrow road between GE and us, the back parking lot, how long would it take them to be able to do it? How long could they shut it down? I guess a lot of those questions never really got answered.
John?
I believe since then we purchased a new paver. I believe. I don't know if that could make it any easier or not.
Al, know what first?
Dave, go ahead and take Deb because she wants to speak to this issue.
Oh, there she is. Deb?
I wasn't here when all that went down, but if you want us to relook at it and give you a concrete answer as to what we can and can't do with respect to the parking lot, we can do that for you.
Okay.
I think Matt explained it pretty well from what I understood, but I never really talked to anybody about specifics of what we could or couldn't do. So if you want me to do that, I can try to do it by Tuesday next week because that's DPW. So
Yeah, I have the original job plan and everything if you're interested in looking at that. If not, I mean, that's fine too, but I do have.
okay.
Well, I think it's good to look at it, but we don't have that on our capital plan. Is there some desire to put that on the capital plan at all? Matt?
That's my question to Matt Jones, is considering the parking lot project, and these projects we have on the list, can I assume that the parking lot project would be behind the ones you already have going here?
I would put it behind them.
Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
So I had Al.
So what I also wanted to mention is I think that part of the discussion about the parking lot kind of went on pause when we started looking at the DPW barn relocations, because it was the desire of a lot of the members of the board, if my memory is correct, to wait and see what we were going to do with the buildings here on the campus before we designed a parking lot. Because if these buildings were going to be gone, it made a whole different layout for the parking lot job. So that's my memory anyway.
Brian?
And that's kind of where I was at. And at the time, if you remember, we had an estimate of 900,000. I think the bid came in at 790 or 7 something. It was probably the best deal we were ever going to get. And I believe now that all has to be engineered again. So the 100,000 or whatever we wasted on engineering would have to be spent again too. That was my point for thinking we should have done it back then. We got it a lot cheaper than was ever expected. And I figured it would be 10 years before we replaced the barn, and it looks like it's still going to be 10 years before we replace the barn. So in hindsight, it was a great deal. We probably should have did it, but you can't change that now. So I think going forward, that's what we're going to have to look at, is what's the engineering cost, because the problem here is we have all the drainage, and you have to mill it down for that drainage to fit and for the sidewalks to fit. And it's a job that, as much as we would like DPW to be able to do it, it's a job that takes a lot more effort and opportunity than what we do when we're building just a certain width of road. It's a whole different project, and I think that's what we found out when they did their walk around and everything, and that's kind of where it died. But not surprised we're back here, but it's almost an invalid discussion when no one wants to pay for it and do it right, because doing it wrong would just be money wasted. So until we're ready to actually go forward and do the job the way it should be done, there probably is a few other things, like Matt said, that are on the top of the thing right now. Our problem will be if somebody gets hurt, it's a liability that we could have had to put away in the past.
Dan Shaw?
There, can you hear me?
Can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay, so far what everybody has said is correct, but there was another factor to that parking lot that changed. The cost is what made us all kind of hesitant, but the driving factor, as I recall, was parking space. And when the engineering came back, there was discussion on how to create more parking space, and the parking lot was going to be totally redesigned. Now that we've purchased Burgoyne and maybe alleviated most of our parking problems, plus what DPW did out front to create parking space, I really think that a lot of the urgency has left that matter. There is a few spots, and I think DPW has been, and Buildings and Ground has done a great job correcting most of them. So I agree with some of the comments where it's not on the capital plan. And I think from what you have listed on the capital plan, we don't need to delve into this parking lot issue any further. I don't see a need to put it on the capital plan.
I agree with what Dan said, that engineering was completely different than our requirements now. It included a new entrance into the complex. Traffic patterns were going to change. You're going to create more parking spots. With Burgoyne, the pressure for parking spots has been helped a little bit. What I'm talking about is paving the crumbling paving. That's a much simpler job than the original engineering design was. You know, let's resurface the paving. Maybe that can be done to help carry things along, but all the other engineering of removing buildings and everything else, that is not kind of what I'm talking about.
Matt Jones?
I agree with both Dan and Dana on that. Just a little history there. I mean, it's right now we have COVID, so we're still a reduced workforce, so that's helping parking. Burgoyne should help parking too. I agree with both of those statements. The other thing that I should put into this, when the parking lot was decided to be engineered and brought up, it was before I was here. I came in at the tail end of the engineering. There was no capital plan. There was no priorities on what needed to be done. We walked into, we were going to do the parking lot. And I mean, it was a one-off job. So if it needs to be part of a capital plan, I would put it down the road a little farther. That's all. And maybe I can still work with Deb on resurfacing, like Dana said, for now.
Okay. So I guess there's no immediate rush to do that research, Deb.
I think me and Deb can talk about it, and we can talk with Jimmy and her crew and maybe come up with a plan. I don't know how much they can do in a year, especially if we're going to use them for doing Burgoyne in the spring before their, road paving comes up or whatever. So I think we can have that discussion and bring it back to you maybe next month.
Sounds
that'd be good. Okay, Brian,
Yes.
you want to talk about where we stand financially and plan moving forward to complete some of these capital projects?
Okay, so on your list, if you turn to the other page, this puts all the buildings and grounds and DPW together. Cash on hand is about 1.164616 is the number we have. And we're looking at it as with bonding the roof, but we have no idea what that roof is going to cost until it goes out to bid. We think we're in the ballpark. So in finance, if Dave doesn't mind, we're going to probably award that bid because they'll be in by then and it won't slow down the process. And the reason I'm saying that is we need to decide at the February meeting what we are going to bond. We know the college has to be bonded within 2 years, but right now it looks like the rates are as good as they're going to be, and that's the news we're getting from fiscal advisors. And therefore, if we were going to roll everything into one, we would probably put the roof in with SUNY Adirondack and maybe something else. If the roof comes in, say, at $700,000, maybe we add something more, maybe we take some away, whatever the board really decides. But at 1.65%, it looked very doable, like we could make it work in next year's budget. And so therefore, we need to vet all that, and that's why you got this sheet today, was so you could look at anything and have any questions and be ready for finance on where you want to go with that.
So estimated cost is $8,220,000. That's for all these projects, correct?
Yeah, and like we're saying bonding on the barns at Fort Ann and Easton, or it's the Middle Falls barn actually, but whether it's in Easton, Greenwich, wherever it ends up, we're saying that it's a couple million at each barn, but that if we work with the town, it might be less than that, and if we have to do them alone with the county, it may be more than that. So those are just estimates, because we don't know what the actual barn will cost till we get there, and that's why the feasibility, whatever, the consolidation study, and which we've done the majority of that already. That's why the consolidation study's in there, and then the engineering for the building is in there too. But those are all things that have to be done in advance of probably deciding whether you actually go forward or not. We need to know that the town is going to be ironclad with the county before we go through with a study and with funding. There's no point in doing that for the hell of it. So those are the other things, and they're all going to be timing issues. And until we get a town and the county together to lock in, it's basically county funding until then. So I guess those are the things you have to put out in front and look at.
So if we look at this for 2021, I don't know what the subtotal on that. Subtotal on that is,
725,
pardon?
725.
Yeah, if you take out the $1 million in bonding, yep.
Okay, 725.
Plus the roof.
Plus roof, so assuming we're bonding for the roof, where do we gonna get the $725,000 to do these projects this year?
Out of the 1.16416 that's in the cash up at the top. What was the contingency? We moved it at the last meeting, you remember?
Okay. D&A?
And Brian, in 2022, there's in 2022, there's $125,000 for engineering for Middle Falls and Fort Ann. I think the buy-in from the towns would be if they contribute to that engineering money for the engineering. You get them, you get the tie-in just as we get in the front door. Don't wait until the very end. Because if
Yep, it should be ironclad, and maybe that gets paid for out of the bonding, but either way, it should be ironclad that they're all in or not, one or the other.
because the engineering is going to involve consolidating those barns too, so it shouldn't just be a county cost.
Yep.
John Rozell?
Are those barns going there if the town agrees or disagrees?
Those are the two that are at the top of the list, so if Fort Ann and whoever's gonna be, whether it's Middle Falls, Greenwich, or who it is, if they can come to an agreement, those would be the first two that would be done. Those are the first two up, the way I understand from Deb and Matt Jones.
Well, John, was your question if this will be the bond and that instead of the county and the county bonding, we'll do one bond?
We would do one
And share
bond,
the cost.
and the town would get the same rate as the county because that's the cheapest rate. So there would have to be an ironclad agreement before we went forward with any of that.
Okay, if there was not an agreement, those buildings wouldn't be in those towns?
No, they would just, if they don't come to an agreement, the county still has to more than likely replace them, but that's a decision we have to come to. We're actually gonna tour the barns at some point, and we'll get to decide whether we wanna actually replace them or not, or what condition we think they're in. That's all gonna be vetted.
But the difference would be if the towns don't want to join us, we still build our own barn.
We may still have to build a barn, but it would be totally on county dollars at that point if it's a county barn.
And much smaller.
Yes,
Yes.
the price would hopefully be smaller, but not necessarily.
Proportionally, I get it.
So out of curiosity, if we're looking at consolidation,
And remember, with the consolidation of the barns, it's $200,000 per entity involved. So if it's a town in the county, there's $200,000 benefit for each. And if there's a village, there'd also be another $200,000 benefit for village. So it could be as much as $600,000 off the initial price of the building, which is, a considerable amount of money. And that's why the consolidation is really being looked at, and the fact that we could share, maybe one of us owns a grader, one of us owns a payloader, and we don't need two of everything in these locations. So we're trying to cut costs and be more efficient across the board.
Dan,
Brian, 200,000 from whom? New York State for shared services?
Yes. So we don't know if it's even real or not at this point, but they're still telling that it is.
Matt Hicks?
So, Brian, the top part with buildings and grounds is stuff that we've identified. Matt says, these are our priorities. You figure out a way to pay for those, which basically is bonding the roof. And we have a pretty linear path on how we're going to accomplish those, though the timing may change as we go along. The DPW was more of a wish list plan that we're just throwing that out there to say, if these things fall into place, decisions have to be made, here's the path where we're going, and there's going to be a lot of twists and turns in that. So there's sort of two different views on things, right? I mean, we have a clear view on buildings and grounds, but a murky view on DPW, and there's a ton of decisions that have to be made on DPW before we spend any money there, right?
Yes, and when we talked about this, I think it's 2 months ago now, we talked, there's actually two different types of capital plan. There's your actual stuff you're just renewing, and then sometimes there's actually new buildings. In DPW, it's the belief of our head of DPW that some of these buildings are at life's end, and that's why we're gonna actually go and look at them and see if we come to the same conclusion, because we all need to be on the same page if we're spending this kind of money. So that's kind of where we're at.
So if we come to the conclusion that the Middle Falls barn is just shot, we gotta replace that, but if we go to the Fort Ann barn or the Heber barn, we might have come to the conclusion that, that's got some more life in it, let's move it back into the capital plan. So we have lots of flexibility in the bottom part, right?
Yep.
Okay.
The question on consolidation study, didn't we pay for a study?
We've done a consolidation study, but then you have to do a little more study to figure out how the actual towns would fit together. So like, pretty much Fort Ann is nearly done. Middle Falls really isn't. But if you look at the consolidation plan that was sent, that was 300 pages or whatever that was, most of the Fort Ann stuff is done. There still needs a little more, but the Middle Falls is got some left, so.
Okay. Matt?
So Brian, do you feel comfortably financially that with that $1 million bond for the roof and the money in the capital plan that's currently there now, we have a path to finish most of the buildings and grounds projects, and we have a beginning of the DPW projects?
Yeah, I would say we're good.
With the cash we have in the one bond?
Yeah, I would say we're good for 3 to 4 years.
Okay. So we get to the big numbers later.
And by then, hopefully, the economy's straightened out from COVID and we can see where we're at.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Dan Shaw?
Yeah, I'm a little confused about the Middle Falls barn replacement. You seem not to make it clear to me anyway. What is the plan of what town are you discussing this with, and how are you determining? If there's going to be a study, doesn't it have to be a study with one town? But it sounds like you've got several towns you're talking about.
Well, you'd have to study each one would have to be studied separately, but you'd have to come to an agreement that you were going to pay for your half of the study and you were going to pay for your part of the barn. Remember, if you build a $3 million barn and 80% of it's the town, you owe $2.4 million of the $3 million. So it's according to the towns have to realize that going forward that that's their cost, not the county cost, and that's why I said it has to be.
Both towns know that, so I guess what I'm trying to understand, if you're not going to build a Middle Falls barn in Easton and partner with another town, it would, if you built the Middle Falls barn in Easton, which is where it is now, you'd partner with Easton unless you got a better proposal to partner with another town? I mean,
Either that, or what if because of your beats, maybe you have just one bay in Easton and one bay in Greenwich and work out of there. It just is different. Because you got to remember they all go on paving crews and bridge crews over the summer, so it's all about snow plowing in the winter, and that's when you park your trucks inside that's important. So
you're going to build two barns
differently, but we haven't. That's not up to me. That would be up to DPW.
But it's that way you'd have to build two barns, right? For Middle Falls barns, if you're going to put part of it in Easton and part of it in Greenwich. That sounds
That's a
very
possibility.
expensive.
That's why I said it has to be vetted. It might be cheaper to the county all the way around, but it might not be cheaper to the town. That's the question.
Interesting.
John Rozelle?
I put a wish list. Wish list. How does that add up in your opinion, Al?
So I mean, the big question at the end of the day is how we're going to pay for it. I mean, the good news is there's kind of two conversations in play right now. There's the short-term conversation that Mr. Hicks pretty much hit the nail on the head. The action today that we really need is, do you want to go forward with sending an authorization to borrow $1 million to finance? Because that'll give you $1 million for the Burgoyne Avenue roof, and leave enough money in the projects for 21 and 22. So that takes care of your short-term needs on the list that's in front of you. So that's kind of the first part of the conversation. And I think that's the easy part, for lack of a better term. The harder conversation that you have time, again, to Mr. Hicks's point, is this long-term DPW strategy with the barns and stuff, because I noticed on the list, you have Middle Falls and Fort Ann in the 5-year plan. I'd be really curious what happened to this complex, because there's nothing about this complex on this plan. And a year ago, that was one of the top priorities, and now it's not on the plan at all. So I don't know if that fell off the plan or if it's just been pushed, because we're looking at $8 million without this complex. So I'd be curious to see what that number is with this complex being relocated somewhere. And then you would have there'd be a different financing. There'd be a different look at the financing if you're going to go into Middle Falls, Fort Ann, and possibly, this complex reconfiguration. The borrowing would look a little different. But that would be you have, like Brian said, you might be in 2023 or 24 before you have to. There's a lot of trigger points between now and then, so you have plenty of time for that one.
Matt Jones?
It was my understanding that this complex would probably never be any closer than 10 years, even in our plan when Chris was here. I mean, that was kind of an understanding. What we did was we shortened this up with Brian to 5 years. And we took the other stuff out because it's a huge number and it's a huge project. And whether it comes to fruition or not, I think we were asked as department heads, and I'm going to speak for Deb here, to prioritize what comes first, and let's consolidate, get it into a plan that's handleable, that we can handle or try.
I like the fact that it's a 5-year plan, Matt. I appreciate that very much. I just wanted to know where this complex fell into the plan.
That's where it disappeared. Probably in the 10-year to 15-year plan, I think would be, probably, like I'm speaking for Deb, but that's probably where we were thinking.
Right. And part of the reason I ask is it ties back into the earlier parking lot conversation. They're kind of a married conversation.
Sure.
Matt?
It's my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, that this is a capital plan. It's not static. It needs to be reviewed every 6 months, every year. It's going to be a living thing going forward that we're going to change, and the guys after us and gals after us will probably change as we go. It's not going to say, well, I love this, we're all set, we're all done, this is the next 5 years, let's not talk about it anymore. It's my understanding that won't be the case. This may change significantly next year, like it changed significantly from last year. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, and I think the priorities are always changing, as you saw with COVID.
Priorities and finance.
Everything steps back, so you kind of have to look what the new priority is, and there's always going to be a priority that steps to the forefront over something you planned for.
Okay.
So one of the driving forces of the complex here was the annex buildings, and that has really been partially resolved with Burgoyne Avenue, so that's changed a lot of the space issues here, as well as the need to make changes over in the annex buildings. So I think it's changed, and we'll have to reevaluate it. It may change the priorities of what was here, because we don't have to think about taking down buildings over there, even though we'd like to, or moving things around because of that, to build additional spaces. Matt?
And so your reasoning is to vet this all out, get everybody on board, understanding what's going on today, so we all can get our questions answered. But the action item is going to be whether we move to finance the $1 million of financing to do the Burgoyne. Yeah, that's the one thing we decide on today. Other than that, it's just discussion and information.
The thing is moving the bonding, at least to be talked about the finance, because by then we'll have that bid, and we need to open that bid and financing, because you have to be all done in February, and our bonds are callable in March, or the ban is to turn that to bond. So that's where the interest rate, that's where the big benefit is getting that lower interest rate. So that has to be done in February in order to have everything set to go out for bonding in March when it needs to happen.
So that's the action item. Everything else is
the action item
that we're going to have. This is phase one of the discussion. We're going to discuss this again and again and again, but it's just information for today. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I need a question, John Roselle.
I'll make a motion to move it to finance.
A motion by John Roselle. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Oh, Lester, okay. Sorry, Lester.
Yeah, Paul.
And Paul? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried?
Dave,
Just so you know? Yes.
before we move off capital projects, I had a question when we were talking capital project 125, and I said, how many capital projects are there? Is the building grounds 5-year, is that number 125?
Yes,
And what number is the DPW?
it's all part of 125, Dana.
All part of one. Do we have other numbers out there for capital projects?
We do, and you'll get a full report at finance this month.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Done with that. The other thing we had talked about, and I asked Roger to look into it, was there was a request to see if we do a policy about department heads being involved in political parties. Roger, were you able to look into that?
Yes, I was. I think what you have to do is use the Hatch Act, which talks about political activities in government. And even the Hatch Act, which used to be fairly restrictive in terms of political activities and running for office and being involved in politics before it was loosened up, allowed activity in political parties. So I think you have a real First Amendment problem with banning political party activity by any employees.
So,
Any political party activity at all?
Yeah. Yes. In other words, being members of a committee. When I say political party activity, I mean membership in a committee or activity in a committee.
Officer of a committee? Executive?
we're talking specifically about being an officer.
Right. And I think you would have a problem with that. You all can feel free to vote however you want to vote for candidates or for people who are candidates for employment in the county. And just like you have individual thresholds perhaps for recusal in certain cases of your own, you could have an individual threshold for who you wanted to appoint to a position based on what their activities were. But I think a blanket policy would not serve you well. In other words, if you personally didn't want to vote for somebody who was an officer at a party, I think that's your prerogative. They're not a protected class like some other classes are, but I think a blanket prohibition would not serve you well.
Dana Hogan?
Roger, what would happen if we did? What would be your concern regarding the legal consequence?
My concern would be that somebody would challenge it. It would be overturned. If that's the route you choose to take, I guess that's the route you choose to take.
So that's the worst that happens?
Well, if somebody could show that they would have qualified for a job and would have been appointed other than for that particular purpose, you may have a bigger problem in terms of a financial remuneration, but
well, didn't we do that recently? We told the department head or somebody who was going to assume a position or that he had to resign from a position. Didn't we already do that?
Well, I think the difference is there was not a blanket policy endorsed by the government of the county to do that. That was an indication, in my understanding, that there didn't appear to be enough votes there because individuals who had their, again, as I said, individual opinions about whether that was appropriate or not chose to exercise those individual opinions.
So it could be it still could be up to the county to put together policy. Would there be a less powerful message and sort of that we have a statement or a letter that we discourage involvement in political parties for department heads? I'm just trying to find a way to do it. I mean, if we want to do a policy, we can do a policy, and we'll be open to someone litigating that.
Well, the net effect of a letter is the same thing as a policy, quite frankly. If you're going to make a statement, it doesn't really matter how you make it. It's still the same statement.
Dana Half?
We kind of set a precedent. It's not in writing. It's an understanding. I think we just leave it alone.
Matt? Any comments?
Well, you know, I think it's a good idea because there's a lot of potential conflicts of interest out there. It's hard to go against advice of counsel on this situation, but certainly we could go years and years and years and not have that conflict of interest ever show up. But if it ever did, it'd be nice to be proactive out ahead of that a little bit. But so I'm torn. I think there's an issue, and I think there could be a problem. I'm just not sure what the solution is. And it's, my concern is not that a department head is working on an assemblyman's or a state senator or a congresswoman's staff and their political work there. It's work internally in the county that has a direct crossing of a supervisor's situation that creates that conflict. So I understand what Roger's saying, a blanket would cover everything. I'm just trying to avoid a problem going forward where that cross-pollination happens, that's all. And I don't have the solution.
So the question also is what happens if a department head gets involved after accepting a position? How do we handle that? And that's just as revealing as any other.
They come up for review periodically.
Dana Hogan?
I thought I shared this about a month ago. One of the concerns I had was we were holding somebody else to a higher level of what we've done in the past. And my understanding is, did we ask that person to resign from his role in exchange for approval of a job?
I don't recall a quid pro quo. I recall that there was some concern expressed.
Was there communication
Not
given to that
that
person?
I really can talk about.
Was it privately communicated to that person?
I can't speak to it because I didn't do that.
You're saying you didn't, Matt? Did anybody else?
Dana have?
Nobody else did. Okay.
No,
I don't know about the rest of you, but I continually evolved. There's things that I know today that I didn't know in the past. My actions today are based upon the judgment from my experience of the past. So, you know, maybe something happened 4 years ago that I really didn't think a lot about. Today, I think about it more. So I don't think you could say because we didn't do something when we were more ignorant than today, we shouldn't do it today.
Right, Dana, but the counter to that is you could say it's an inconsistent application of a policy. I mean, we've had this situation come up in the past. Nobody raised an eyebrow.
Yes, but we don't have a policy.
Sue?
It's interesting because I think that when we personally take on any of these jobs, we look at it as making sure that we're doing it for the county at large and not coming in and doing it from our own personal interest. If it's coming in from your own personal interest, then that could be a conflict of interest. And so most of us, even you, Dana, have decided to pull away from different things because of a conflict of interest with your insurance. I did the same thing with mental health. I felt like I pulled away, even though I had great interest. I went to Roger and said, Roger, do you think it's a good idea that I come off the CCSI because of a conflict of interest? We talked about that at LDC. Where's that line?
Well, I think the line is that you made that personal choice yourself, as did I. I don't think we gave this person a choice. The inherent message was resign or don't get the position.
Sam?
Yes, and to answer Supervisor Hogan's original question, yes, the applicant was told that it did not appear that they would have the enough support if he didn't resign from the committee, from his position, not the committee.
So I guess it comes down to the question is, do we want to government want to consider putting together a policy, considering Mr. Wick's advice? Brian?
Well, I guess guess I got a question because I don't know when we've done it in the past. I think in the past, I know Sam was the chair of the Republican Party. We haven't had many chairs since I've been here, I think 3 or 4. But I think Sam was a department head when he became the chair. Already, this was different. This was a chair becoming a department head, so it's kind of in reverse. It's not exactly the same, number one. And number two, I don't know that it would have been fair to dismiss a candidate if the person wasn't made aware first that you're being dismissed, not because you're not a quality candidate, you're being dismissed for a reason that we could have just informed you of. So therefore, I think we probably did it the right way. I'd have hated to turn somebody down without, and that just seems like a cold slap in the face and they don't hear anything about it. I think that would be wrong. But I can see it both ways here. I just don't know with our legal advice how you'd go against the legal advice to change and have a policy.
And there's
But
a tremendous.
I can also see where you'd make somebody aware before you just vote them down. I think that would be a travesty too.
There's a tremendous difference between a policy and telling somebody it doesn't appear they have the votes. They could not have the votes for a myriad of different reasons. So they could be involved in businesses that are perfectly legal or not a violation of any of the conflict of interest laws. And yet somebody could think, an individual supervisor could vote for reasons of their personal opinions as to what constitutes a conflict of interest. Just like when you recuse, some of you may recuse for one reason, some of you may not feel you have to recuse. There's no legal reason for it. It's your personal reason for doing so. So there's a tremendous difference between a policy that the county government passes that says no, and I can't support you because of whatever reason I can't support you, as long as it's not an impermissible reason, like I can't support you because you're female, because of your religious classification, because of your sexual orientation, or any of those other classes.
3.5.
I think the problem with having a policy is that you end up trapping yourself, because somebody will also find a loophole they can drive a truck through, and you can't really, you don't have the flexibility to respond to that. Does everybody remember when we interviewed for the DPW superintendent? We had very much the same issue on one of the candidates, and we thought there was a big conflict of interest, and that affected the way we would have voted individually. I think you're kind of dangerous. It's dangerous to come up with a policy because that's on the 4 corners of the page and you have to act within that policy. And there may be something outside of that that you want to act on, but you're bound by the page. I think having a policy basically saying we don't have a policy, because that policy all it's going to say is we don't have a policy, which is silly.
Sue Clary?
I think where this came back to was the situation we were talking about. It was actually verbalized and put back into the Board of Supervisors' lap saying, well, if you want me to do that, you can send me a letter. Okay, and that's kind of how it got back to the Board of Supervisors looking at doing the policy. I think that was brought up a couple of times. So rather than us voting, we were trying to figure out how to make it work. And so that's how it developed. Whether it was right or wrong, that's, I think, how it developed.
So an alternative is that perhaps since our personnel committee is now responsible, working with the oversight committee to hire department heads, perhaps that should be a discussion with any potential candidate in terms of they may not get support if they are active in an officer or leadership role in a political party. Does that make sense?
20 years from now, they might. I think that was Mr. Half's point.
Yeah.
Dave, we have conflict of interest questions on a wide range of things. It's broad spectrum. It isn't just political party. It's, are you a vendor? Do you have interest in a different company? There's a lot of different varieties. So I think to pigeonhole this to a political party, you're being very narrow scope. And I think that's might be not what you want to do. It removes our flexibility.
Okay. Then I think from what I hear, the consensus is we do not want to go forward with the policy.
Did that well.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else come before the committee? All right, adjourned. Thank you.